Hey everyone, this is Living Dead. I thought I'd make a special video today. Kind of wanted to make a video talking about some aspects of making my latest map, Elevated Response. I got some interesting comments about it, particularly with respect to the design and my choice to try to blend some modern textures from like OTEX with some of the IWAD textures. So I thought I'd maybe talk a little bit about my process for that. So anyways, I thought maybe where I'd get started with this is to just kind of go over some of the mindset I had when kind of coming up with this concept in the first place. I was working on this earlier project that I kind of started to sort of cut my teeth with mapping called, I nicknamed the project Harm. I don't know, just because I thought it sounds kind of goofy but cool. And my first map is Malleable Intent. It basically uses all stock Doom 2 textures and nothing out of the ordinary. You can see here. But I tend to favor a type of detailing where you rely a lot on the border textures and just to kind of bring some detailing out in the environmental geometry, sectors and stuff like that. And so, you know, this kind of was maybe me sort of exploring this style a little bit early on. You know, some things that look a little bit industrial and maybe brutalist with, I don't know, trying to figure out how to rely on this sort of very low variety of the stock texture set to still look visually distinct and interesting from area to area. And you can see kind of the way that I relied a lot on these sort of alternating visual details and just trying to find ways to vary the height of different things and the shading of different things so that you have a contrast between indoors and outdoors types of areas, right? Okay, so this is sort of me exploring that sort of style. And then we kind of move along a little bit forward in time to my second released map, Stygian Anguish. I think 1.3, this file is the most recent one I worked on. It's loading up here. And this one I did in, so the last one was, I started it in vanilla format, I moved it to boom format, and then this one is in UDMF format. So you can kind of probably guess that I was absolutely going through these projects as a way to experiment more than anything else. I had a contiguous idea. Eventually the end of Malleable Intent was going to be altered to look like the beginning of this map, which is you start off in an elevator, hit a switch, and you go down. And then you're kind of in this subterranean area that starts out in this kind of like staging warehouse, where maybe they'd pack up samples from whatever they're doing down here and ship them upstairs to the boys to study. That was sort of my mindset. Not that I really care much about story, but I very much care about why a structure exists, so you kind of have to go into that a little bit. Let me turn this music down just a smidgen. That's not changing the volume at all. Okay, let's try this. Oh, that's not working either. Okay, well, I guess this is just the volume then. Sorry, there we go. Okay. And so this one I decided to play around with sector lighting colors and mostly pretty much entirely rely on OTEX. In fact, I don't think there are any stock textures at all in this WAD. And eventually this was going to be level 2. That previous map was going to be level 1, this was going to be level 2. And I have to say, so let me actually back up real quick. So you can see I kind of was just experimenting a lot with relying more on natural geometry and then how to incorporate buildings into it. But this is predominantly an area that's defined by natural geometry. So, and then I kind of picked up some of these sector detailing techniques from Skillsaw. A lot of this map was heavily inspired by Bushwhacked from Valiant, and just the way that you have to navigate these tight precipices and things, and the way that the enemies are kind of set up to just kind of thwack you from the sides and really force you to just kind of navigate this sort of harrowing passage, although it's not that dangerous in retrospect, and into an area that you would be uncomfortable pushing into normally to quickly prioritize some of these targets and then make sure you can get yourself out of the danger zone. Oh, do I not have this on repeat? Now this is just off to a great start. Well, we'll just do this. I haven't used Winamp in so long, I don't remember how this works. There we go, toggle repeat. Anyways. So, you can see that this is, you know, has its very, very distinct visual style from my previous map, Malleable Intent. And when Hack3180 was playing it in his playtesting thread, he actually made the observation. He put together the connection that I hadn't really thought too much about, that I was planning on using these two maps together in the same mapping project, and how, oh, there's a stock texture, how much they clash in styles. And he was absolutely right about that, because you can't just, if you follow those two maps together, it's going to feel like a community project in the way that it's not congruent at all. And I honestly took that as a bit of a challenge, but also as a bit of a burst of creative inspiration. So I thought, how could I make a map that convincingly blends the stock textures with other ones from other, especially from OTEX. I hadn't really messed around with CC4 yet, because I didn't really know much about it, or any of the other ones from like Realm 667 or whatever. So this was me trying OTEX plus stock textures. And really I was going to rely much more heavily on the stock textures overall. So I kind of came up with this idea to kind of fit this in with the other two maps, and the kind of progression, or the story, quote unquote, that I had envisioned for it, which was you know, just kind of coming up to this secluded mountain base, going in and infiltrating. There was, you know, that you find this, there's this subterranean operation, and eventually, you know, I don't know, go to hell or something like that. So this was sort of going to become map 1. I had nicknamed it map 0 because I already had map 1 in my folder structure, and that's just kind of how I, you know, that was just whatever. So I started to think about how could I kind of lay the foundation for a mapping project that blends these two texture sets together, so that if I do make a map that's entirely one or the other, maybe it doesn't feel completely as incongruent. And this was sort of the beginning of that idea. So what I really did was I started off by figuring out how I wanted this area to look, and kind of coming up with the concept. I want the player to feel like they've come up a high elevation and they're fighting up in this peak mountaintop area. So I start the player off at the top of this elevator thing, and I wanted to put a nice area that they would come from behind them. And this was going to kind of set the foundation for what the rest of the map looks like. And also to convincingly conceal that you can't really tell when you go into this first area what is going to be beyond this door. It looks very innocuous and almost harmless. But we all know better, because we see this right here. So you go inside, and you can see that I really relied, my technique tends to be a mix of blocking areas out with making some decisions about the key visual theming early on, so that I can kind of let this sort of gestate in my mind after I've made it, and then just kind of consider how it looks, and then start to think about what the level flow is going to be like. And you can see, if you've played the other one, the actual finished version, this is nothing other than where this resides, is nothing like what the actual ending area looked like. This was just an original nook that just added some variety to just having a flat wall here. And this was just my attempt at doing something that wasn't just putting a door here at the end of this hallway with nothing interesting. And then I kind of set the initial foundation for what I wanted this to look like. This is, you know, this is, it says 1 in the file name of the WAD, but really it's probably like, you know, I would guess several days into the timeline of when I was working on this project. So this is not something I whooped up in like a couple of hours. So I decided really early on I wanted this. I knew in my head that what I wanted was, you come into this sort of like checkpoint base. This is, so you come up the mountain, you come through the passage. This is sort of like the first checkpoint area. And then there's going to be this large natural kind of like valley type of area, this like river that comes from the mountain, right? Because that's where rivers come from. And I really wanted to make sure that it took advantage of the elevation a lot, because I like the idea of climbing down and then climbing back up. So I really thought about how I could do that and how I could kind of build a progression around that concept. So I early on decided I wanted, and you can see how this looks compared to the finished version, I wanted this sort of like ominous, inaccessible looking building to be very clearly the goal of where you go. And so you're figuring out how to get into this base. So that's why you're kind of skirting around on the outside of it to start with. And I also really liked the idea of having a destination that was, you know, climbing up and getting almost some of the reward is that you get another angle to like look out at the map from, more than just like opening a door or switch up, which is what this switch does. It opens a trap and also gives you access into the base. So you can see some maybe how my iterative process kind of begins to take shape. I at this point, early on these two areas had not been connected, but at this point I was beginning to connect. I had connected the starting area together with the area that the most of the map takes place in, so that it legitimately just feels like part of the same place. I didn't want any kind of skybox business to break the immersion or make the area feel incongruent, so I just opted to connect them together like this. So then, as I kind of started to iterate through it, I'm going to just go ahead and skip up to the most recent version of it. You can compare kind of the differences. Actually, let's back up a little bit. Let's go back to what it used to look like before I rebooted the project. So I think that was 1.1. Okay. So at this point, it's beginning to take shape. This is after a lot of iteration, and now you can kind of see I had come through here, I'd begun placing enemies, which is not something that I do initially in a map. I usually don't place enemies until I have several rooms that you're going to be exploring, at the very least, several areas you're going to be exploring. I usually don't place resources that early in the process either, so a lot of what I do is just kind of given to the design and the visuals than it is anything else. So then, okay, here we go. So we kind of come in and we can begin to see, and I'll talk about the lighting here in a minute too, but how the theming begins to take shape. I really wanted to lean into this contrast between this almost, it's not like an oppressive darkness, but it's an ominous evening type of setting. It's you know, you're getting into the base just at the nick of time before sunset, and you know, kind of gives it a bit of a transitionary type of feeling to it, or a sense of urgency maybe. So I like the idea of having that kind of ominous glow contrasted with this base that is mostly lights out, and then you kind of come to this area that is very bright, just to kind of give it some visual distinction. Mostly I wanted to rely on the fact that this place looks like it's been abandoned or infested with demons for a while, and that's why the power systems are starting to kind of go into, maybe the backup generators are kicking in or something. So I had done a lot. You can see the difference here now. I had, whatever this one is called, Brick 7, it was used a lot in the blocking of this, but I just didn't really like the way that it made the building look to rely entirely on the Brick 7. So I started to pull OTEX a lot more out of the backpack at this point and began employing it, still keeping in stock textures where I felt like they could meld well with the palette. And that's the big thing, is that OTEX has its own kind of palette, I guess, propensity that clashes a lot with stock textures, and there's a whole lot of them that I don't think really work very well with the stock textures. This, I ended up taking these out. I mean, this kind of looks stupid. This is not really, I don't think this looks really good combined together with the stock textures. I like the way, I don't really love this texture that much, whatever it's called, Merfolate. But you know, you kind of have to have some concessions given to the Doom stock textures if you're going to work on that as a constraint. So I didn't really change this. In fact, I almost did before I published this map, but I kept it this way. You can see I had already, I wanted this weird, almost like gangly, spidery looking thing, which is really where a lot of this kind of came from in an early iteration of the design. And so I kind of leaned very heavily into, you know, what I wanted the map to feel like was you're unlocking this like structure that's kind of got this security shell around it, and then when you press the switch, there's some teleports that former humans spawn in from, and they're also back here in this early version of it. That was changed in the final version, but so they can begin spilling out of the map. I almost wanted it to be this like I don't know, feel kind of like some kind of horror movie type of thing where, you know, you unlock the haunted base, the heroes finally unlock the haunted base, and they see all the corrupted dead begin to spill out of it in this like senseless horde. So that between that, the chain gunners that pop out here, and the two cacodemons that sort of probably distract you a little bit, by the time you realize what's going on, these guys have already kind of spilled out a little bit, and then you have just picked up the chain gun, and so it's this perfect opportunity to just kind of get down here and start blowing people away. So ultimately, I think the execution, that was probably one of the better things. I just didn't really like the way that this looked visually. You can see how much tighter this room is than it was, and then how this was just kind of a very basic doorway. And what I ended up doing in the final version is I extended this part of the building all the way out to here and made this much larger, more open area that I think worked out a lot better. So I guess right now then, I'm going to take a moment to talk about the lighting and how I kind of achieved some of that effect. And by the way, I don't really certify that I'm doing things the ideal way. This is just the way that I did it. I'm not an expert in mapping. I haven't been mapping that long. So the stock vanilla non-graphically enhanced lighting is, it's effective if you do it right, but it's really a matter of lightness and darkness, and you don't get any say over color. The real say you have over color in vanilla design is what textures you choose to use in an area. And because I was making this in UDMF, I said, why not? Let's just go ahead and experiment with the colors and other things. I originally didn't really want to use dynamic lights at all, because I still like the way that pre-baked lighting looks, like a lot. I think it really gives Doom its kind of characteristic design. And so you can see, like with a lot of this, we're still getting a lot of the pre-baked sector lighting. But over time, I kind of began to concede to how it could contribute to the mood. If I didn't rely on the dynamic lighting to actually light the area, but to rather enhance the lighting that I pre-baked in. So that's what I did with the different options you have open to you. In fact, this is probably a combination of everything that I did right in this. Again, this room right here is probably the kind of key frame or the key visual element that influenced most of the way that I designed the rest of the map. Beside the texturing, with respect to the lighting anyways. So this sector right here, I use this effect called floor glow. And so when you turn it on, turn it off, and you can see it's just the continuous stock texture. When you turn it on, oh, I have reset it. Let's just cancel that real quick. So when you turn it on, it'll apply the color of your choice to the sector wall, or the texture. So you have the option to grow it or shrink it. And, on its own, it's just kind of a gimmickry type of thing. But what I don't remember when I kind of had this thought, but what I really set on it pretty early on was I wanted it to feel, and you can see that this kind of violates a little bit of the way that light would physically work, for the sake of looking cool. This building, if the sun was setting behind this mountain, which is how I kind of initially conceived the lighting, this building would block all this light in here, but I don't really care. You make concessions to that. You don't always give everything away to the realism of it. The realism gives away to the design every time. That's the way I see it. So anyways, the envisioning aspect of it was the sun sets behind this mountain. So, maybe the sun is probably like right here is kind of where I was imagining it, maybe a little bit higher. And so it hits down in here, but also it's breaking through these slats. Like the sun is just angled barely enough to come down through here. So I apply the floor glow effect here just very subtly along all of these exposed sectors to kind of just make it look like light's hitting it. And then, of course, the second effect that I employ is the actual global sector color. So if I reset this, you can see how it just kind of changes it. And we see the difference here. And now the dynamic light actually makes a much more stronger impression on the area, but I don't want that. I really want it to look like it's barely just the sun that's lighting this room here. So this is the way I chose to do that. I thought that these lights on these monitors here offer a nice little just a visual pop. They don't really light the sector. They just contrast a little bit against this, and that's kind of what I wanted there. So then for the outside area follows very much the same principle. I think I also used, let me just backtrack a little bit. I think I also did use different colors. So yeah, this is a lighter shade of orange than this here. And also these sectors are two different brightnesses so that you kind of accept that this pillar does actually block the light a little bit. I don't know how realistic that looks, but it gives it some very good visual contrast all the same. And it doesn't just look like I did it for the sake of making it look varied. I feel like it serves a functional purpose that looks visually good. So you can kind of see how this room took shape. Another thing to kind of think about in terms of the iterative process is that I had considered that somebody else made a comment about my secrets just being item closets. And so I was like, well, okay, let me just make it a little bit of an area that you can see. So you can see right here, there's this like ventilation access thing here. Maybe give you an idea. The player, it's this line def right here, and it opens this secret here, which nobody in the recordings I saw had discovered it. But you get a secret berserk pack. You can do some swinging. Originally, it was literally just that door opens and the berserk pack was right here, but that's kind of lame. So that's how I kind of incorporated a little bit of telegraphing the secret is there by giving you a chance to sort of see it and realize that's probably something that I want to investigate. And then the way you activate it is not that far away. So then anyways, back out to here, the outdoor area. I actually turned the brightness up a lot. So if this did not have sector lighting on it, you can see how bright it actually ends up being. It has a dynamic light also affecting the color of it. You can see, I mean, this is a very bright area. This would look strange if this was like in Boom and it was that, and it was like, you know, supposed to be dusk outside. So really what does a lot of the lifting in this region is the actual sector lighting itself, the global sector color. So then to kind of emulate this sort of effect that I got here with this floor glow, for whatever reason I think the floor glow just didn't look right. I ended up putting a dynamic light here so that you actually get some like refractive effect here. And that really just makes it look like the sun is just lighting this area up. And I didn't really use it almost anywhere else in the map except for here. Just because I didn't really think it needed to be done that much. And it kind of gives this area its own like visual flair. You know, I'm not trying to rely on the same trick over and over again. I like the fact that these two areas look different, and this one just looks like it's a little bit more in the sun's shadow than that side is. So that, you know, there's some contrast to the way that this looks. So another thing that I did was apply those light glows from the floor to these waterfalls down there and down here to just kind of give it a little bit of an effect that, you know, the sun's light is kind of making the water glisten a little bit. So yeah, that's kind of, I mean, that really is probably the long and short of how I created the actual visual style of the lighting. When you come back to this, and the building and the structure architecture, which is stuff that I got a lot of commentary on as well, you can see how, you know, again, I kept the stock textures as sort of a highlight thing, but this was areas where I really let the OTEX kind of lean heavily into the visuals versus than this building here, which is predominantly a stock texture with a pretty much this single OTEX texture that adds some of the highlight. So it's kind of a back and forth, right? You do trade-off. This building is predominantly OTEX, this building is predominantly stock. By incorporating kind of a, you know, a 30-70 split, you know, one way or the other with both of these buildings, they kind of complement each other in that way. And I think that's how I was able to kind of get away with doing it this way at all. Then the other thing too is just really using mostly just this stock texture for all of the environmental, the mountain geometry. Oop. Probably should get that going. Okay. So yeah, there you go. I mean, that's that was sort of my thought process behind that. Oh yeah, this is a so then so you can kind of see the sort of iterations here too as well. You know, as much as I like that kind of spidery sort of look, it just didn't really completely sell it for me. So what I ended up doing was kind of coming back to this and keeping the sort of idea of it, but just pulling it back a little bit. So it's kind of got still these interesting like loops. I don't know what they're for. They just give it some visual variety because the way that it's set up, you know, I didn't have a lot of what I felt like was, I didn't want to just like raise sectors up from the floor to give this some variety. I guess I relied on this, but you know, outside of that, I did kind of want to make this building look almost a little bit too plain, but without it looking too plain, if that makes sense. So, and then the other thing is when the original iteration, you know, I really wanted it to be, you hit this switch, you unlock all the security systems, and then the building just kind of opens up for you. And I felt like the iteration that I had initially come up with did not sell that enough. So I came back and made these huge shutters and that are mirrored here up in these smaller areas that don't even look like doors anymore, and that's kind of the building opening its shell up, and then, you know, the evil spilling out from it. So it's almost, you know, to keep you out as much as it is also to keep the evil contained within. And so I really wanted it to feel like that was the major change or the major surprise that happens in this area. So then you can see from the earlier iteration, I extended this out to give it a little bit more of a flow. I mean, this area still doesn't really serve much of a purpose. There's some enemies that teleport in here, and it could probably be a little bit more interesting, but I'm okay with the way that it is, just giving you some targets to shoot. I didn't really care about making this map that difficult. Blue key gives you access to here, so you still get a nice little chance to come back out into the natural geometry one more time before you finally ascend the building. And that was another thing I really wanted. I really wanted the descending and climbing aspect to not just be descending the outside of this building and down this kind of natural and, you know, artificial kind of area. I also wanted it to take place inside of this building here. So I really like the idea of coming up this elevator and being like really high up, and you can see where you've come from. When these shutters are open, you can, I think, just barely see outside. And before you finally hit that switch to raise this bridge and you come up here. So this is another thing that was a bit contentious, and I accept that feedback. The way that this plays out is you come here and you trip this line def. No. This line def. This one that separates these two sectors, and all these doors open up. 2 pain elementals will show up on ultraviolence, and a whole bunch of revenants depending on what difficulty you're playing on. And depending on how much exploring you've done, you either have 2 rockets if you just picked up the rocket launcher, or you have 12 if you pick these 2 boxes up here. And you are encouraged to blast your way out without killing yourself, which a lot of people felt like was a substantial change in the difficulty. That's a valid criticism. The earlier versions of this WAD, let's go back to this one. I think it's this one. It might be 1.2. I think I kept it. Yep, here we go. Okay, so the original version of this here, you can see there was still a lot of the blocking going on in this iteration. It wasn't until I got this ready to release that a lot of this kind of came together visually too. These guys were always here to just kind of take pot shots at you. But so yeah, same thing, line def trips, all these doors open up here. And then because I had just given the player a whole bunch of rockets between the ones they pick up outside and then these in here, I just thought it'd be fun. Here's a whole bunch of guys to blow up. I you know, overly rely on that gimmick in this map, but it was, you know, going to be a map 1. I wanted to give the player some hardware and some targets to shoot without the map taking too long. And so it was just like, you know, this will be fun. Here's a bunch of Form of Humans to shoot the rocket launcher. And then you kind of come through this larger area. I had this interesting, like, poison fountain for some reason. I don't know. And then finally you come in here, and it's the elevator that actually starts off Malleable Intent. So, you know, I think maybe if you look at it from this perspective, I hope that it kind of comes to see, though, that when I had decided to move this around a little bit and release it as a standalone map, how this is just... Can you imagine just getting... You know, you climb up the building and you finally see what it is, and oh yeah, it's neat to shoot all these guys, and then you're like, well, that's it, and then this big useless open area, and then, you know, this would have had some different details in it, but if this didn't connect to anything, if this connected to Malleable Intent, it would have been slightly more forgivable, but if this didn't connect to anything, this would have just been kind of dumb. This would have been a dumb way to end the level. I mean, it's just wide open for no reason, and I had already... I think at this point in the map's construction had, like, I think this was about 160 monsters, which is just stupid amount of monsters for a map 1. So this was scrapped, and the version that, you know, I finished up with was this thing up here, where I decided it was more like, you know, I wanted to keep the aspect of, like, what are they hiding up at the top of this base? And so to just kind of retread and kind of tie this all together, you know, as you're climbing and descending and whatnot, I think it's pretty evident to the player that they're going to get into this building and then get up there if they notice that. I hope that they see that and realize, like, that's where I'm going to wind up. And I hope that it makes the player think, what's up here? So, you know, that's why I thought it, you know, I wanted to retain the fact that I've given the player the rocket launcher with at least 12 rockets and give them something to blow up, but make it a little bit more interesting. So pain elementals show up and put lost souls in your face while there are projectile enemies and a hit scanner. I assume most players will have probably killed these two guys. Most of the players that I saw did. So, you know, mostly just stuff that you're dodging, nothing that you have to hide behind cover to deal with for the most part. You know, and this is again, these are the ultraviolence monsters, but, you know, just make it something a little bit more interesting than just shooting 30 guys with the rocket launcher. And so, yeah, I wanted to be what's hiding up here, what was the UAC concealing, so that it turned into this weird little, I don't know, staging thing, and then you go down into this pit that they've basically cordoned off, and it's like, oh no, there's hell secrets down here, or something. So, you know, that was kind of the thought behind it. I like the idea of this, like, they erected this giant iron wall, reinforced wall, right up on the side of the mountain, because, like, it's too terrible to contain or something. I don't know, you know, just, that's kind of the idea behind that. But, so yeah, I mean, contentious as this may be, you're welcome to your opinion on it. I accept the criticism for it, but I just wanted it to be a little bit more interesting than what it had been, and because it was its own standalone map, I wanted to have a little bit of a boss feel to it, I guess. So this is what I came up with. So anyways, I mean, I could self-aggrandize about this, I guess, all day long. Of course, there's other critical elements that I'm overlooking in this, but in the interest of just not wasting everybody's time and making this take an hour and a half, I just thought I'd spend some time talking about a few of these select things. But I hope maybe to other prospective mappers out there, or those who were interested in what I did, this might be helpful in incorporating into your own design process, or, you know, if you have some criticisms about the way that I went about things, or some comments about how I could do this better, that's cool too. You know, I'm interested in hearing it. So anyways, thank you for watching this. If you made it all the way through this video, I don't know if I would make more like this. So if people like this, then maybe I will. But otherwise, this was an interesting one-off experiment, and I hope somebody found it valuable. So thank you for watching, and as always, take care.